241 people on board and 19 on ground. Now, the preliminary investigation has revealed disturbing details that we're going to get to the bottom of today. Both engines lost power midway because fuel cutoff switches were disengaged without a clear explanation. Was this catastrophic mechanical failure, a software glitch, or something else entirely? This morning, we're going to look beyond the headlines because this isn't only about a single crash. It's about how advisories that could have saved lives were not enforced, why safety systems fail to protect passengers, and whether other aircraft are flying with the same hidden vulnerabilities. So we're going to ask what must change urgently so that a tragedy like this never happens again. But before we get into that, I'm going to quickly bring in NDTV's Vishnu Som, my colleague who is standing by to help us understand the probe report extensively. Vishnu, over to you.
Well, what we're going to do over the course of the next, for the next several hours, I would suggest, is go through what exactly the preliminary report says. And I'm going to start off right away by saying, as part of the data which has been downloaded, the aircraft crossed the takeoff decision speed V1 at a speed of 153 knots. Let me explain that. This is the aircraft shortly after it took off. It took off successfully at a speed of 153 knots. Let's bring out that video at a later stage showing the entire takeoff run so that I can describe what was happening. The aircraft transitioned from the ground to the air, consistent with the liftoff. It achieved the maximum recorded airspeed of 180 knots, but then it started descending. I'm going to explain to you what the report says about that. But just a few moments after takeoff, right, the aircraft air-ground sensors transitioned to air mode at 8:08:39 UTC, and 3 seconds later, there was an indicator that engine 1 and engine 2, remember there are only 2 engines on the Dreamliner, their fuel cutoff switches had transitioned from the run to the cutoff position, right, with a gap of 1 second. That's bizarre, right? The engine number 1 and engine number 2 began to decrease from their takeoff values as the fuel supply to the engines was cut off. In the cockpit voice recording, one of the pilots is heard asking the other, why did he cut off? And the other pilot responded that he did not do so. What happened after that? As shortly thereafter, there was an attempt by the pilots to restart the engines. Remember, the fuel control switches had been moved off. Why they were moved off, we do not know. But then the aircraft is still flying, but it's losing speed, obviously. Engine number 1, fuel cutoff switch transitioned from the cutoff to the run switch. Or somewhere at this stage, the pilots restarted the fuel flow into the engines, and there was an attempt at relighting the engines, in other words, restarting the engines. And what is absolutely clear is that one of the engines did restart. And we do need to actually explain this over and over again. So this is that takeoff run. The aircraft achieves a speed of 153 knots right there. It climbs into the air momentarily after climbing off. Within a period of approximately 1 second, the fuel switches to both the engines are cut off, right? They are moved from the on position to the off position. At that stage, that is the last thing that you want. Let's go back to that video, because as soon as, let's go back to the video of the aircraft as it flies away, right? We're going to stay with this for a moment. The aircraft takeoff performance is normal. It moves to 153 knots is the speed. Shortly thereafter, it takes off. Keep going with the video, don't freeze it. And at this stage, it's climbing normally, but it's right over here, likely, that the fuel switches have been put into the off position. No one knows what is happening. It is losing its ability to climb. At this stage, one of the pilots asks the other, did you do that? He says, no, I did. It wasn't me, right? In the cockpit voice recording, freeze that over here for a second. In the cockpit voice recording, one of the pilots is heard asking the other, why did he cut off, right? in other words, cut off fuel flow. The other pilot responded that he did not do so. At this stage, there's a device, keep going with the video, called the ram air turbine. It's a small propeller that deploys in an effort to give electrical power to the aircraft. Remember, there was no electrical power, essentially, if both the engines went off. At this stage, both the engines did go off, but just within that 30-odd seconds of that plane being in the air, there was an attempt, and a successful one, to relight the engines. Right? There was a successful attempt to relight the engines, but there was just not enough altitude for the aircraft to power away. Let's move to the next image that we have. Right? This is the position of the fuel switches. The debris shows, freeze the image over here, the debris shows the fuel switches in the on position. But this was done subsequently. As I was describing to you, just as the aircraft took off, the fuel switches were put in the cut-off position. And I'll describe it over here. This is what a normal throttle quadrant looks like. These are the fuel switches in the Boeing 787. These are not normal switches that you go from on to off. The on position is on top. The off position is below. As a safety measure, there are two sets of safeties. Firstly, as you can see, it's guarded over here. There is a guardrail on one side. Zoom in. There's this guardrail on this one side, and there is this guardrail over here on the other side. This is to ensure that accidentally the hand of a pilot doesn't come over here, because these are critical systems, as we know. Secondly, you don't just move these from the on to the off position. To do that, you have to physically lift it out like this, push it down, and then let go, and it's stuck over there, right? It moves into that position, it's locked into that position. If you were to try and push it up like that, it won't move. The only way is if you have a deliberate motion of pulling it out and then moving it like that, and then it's spring-loaded, it falls into place, and it's locked in that position. So in a period of 1 second, if this report is correct, shortly after taking off, both these switches went from the on to the off position. One of the pilots asks the other, "Did you do that?" That pilot says, "No, I didn't." They then take the switches and push them back up, right? One of the engines restarts. It is beginning to spool up, but there was simply not enough altitude. The plane crashes. 260 people, including people on the ground, have lost their lives. Let's move to the next, which is why right over here, it's in the on position, right? This is the debris. The final position, when they recovered this, shows it's on. So this happened afterwards. Somebody had switched it off, or it perhaps switched off by itself. We do not know, but as I've described to you, that seems, it seems unlikely. It's not designed to do that, right? But in the final position, it's been found locked in position in the on position. By then, it was too late. Let's move to the next image of the flight data recorder, because this is a part of the black box. The black box is it's an easy term to remember, but it is composed of two units: the digital flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder. There are two sets of black boxes. There is a black box unit composed of both these items I described in the front of the aircraft and the back of the aircraft. This, I believe, is the digital flight data recorder. And let's freeze the image here for a second. One was found in the front of the aircraft, one was found behind the aircraft, where it was meant to be, but very badly damaged. In both cases, you can see that these have been extremely badly damaged. And there was, we now learn, a delay of several days before equipment. I won't use the word delay, but there was a time period of several days before a specialized chassis and cables and equipment were flown in by the NTSB, which is the American National Transport Safety Board. Very much the world leaders in flight and investigations, this sort of investigation. They brought in their equipment on the basis of which this was opened, and the memory chip inside, which recorded dozens of hours of equipment of information on this aircraft through all its sensors and all its systems, right? That memory card was removed and the data was successfully accessed. And the report that we are now looking at is on the basis of that data which was downloaded. Let's go to the next image. And the next one actually looks at the flap handle lever. Again, this is important because if we can for a moment roll that footage No. Let's go back to the previous one. Let's go back, please, to the previous one. Stay over here. And as we stay over here, if I can just...
Vishnu, we're going to have to come back to you because I'm currently being joined by Captain Surjit Singh Panesar, former Director of Flight Safety and Training at Indian Airlines. Good morning, sir, and thank you so much. Welcome to NDTV Profit. The fuel cutoff switches move to cutoff within 1 second. We're also seeing that the report is showing no contamination or pilot fatigue. How unusual would you say, sir, is it for both switches to disengage simultaneously? Could this happen without any pilot input?
No, it cannot happen without any input from the pilot. No, we have to see this aircraft crash into a building. In the debris, what is the position of the actual fuel lever and all that. Well, only after that we can find it out. Sometimes it happens, people go inside the debris, they move the things and all that. Now, who all have visited the site, and it has to be confirmed by the investigating team, the exact position and the picture of the, because in the debris you cannot find the exact picture of the fuel lever. And second thing, the DFDR should be able to tell us the exact position of fuel lever because they do the recording. In DFDR, recording will also come in line with the picture what they are showing. See, it has to be an open inquiry. They are doing it closed door. We don't know what it is. Not a judicial inquiry. Now, the report also which they are given seems to be a report made by AAIB. Now, only the high-level team of secretary levels, they will decide about this report. I wish it should be a judicial inquiry where veterans, the public has also have access to every instrument, every document, every DFDR recorders and all that, which they are not permitting anybody to come out from outside. Now, it depends how the final report comes in. Only after the final report you can make out what is the exact situation of how the crash took place. Because the position of lever, what they are showing, okay, but the flight recorder will also tell us the position of the fuel lever. When were they moved? Even the time will come on the recorder, okay, what time they moved it. So it is not good for us to preempt by just watching the picture. It has to correlate with the flight recorder also. But that they won't show it to the public or the veterans or all people to assess this. This is a closed-door meeting, which the report which they are given to the ministry. Now this report will be checked by the high-level committee consisting of Secretary, Ministry of Home Affairs, Civil Aviation, BCS, Police Commissioner. Those high-level people will decide about the report, and then we'll wait for the final outcome of the report. Then only the professional comments can be given.
We were seeming to have a little bit of an audio trouble there with you, Captain Panesar, but stay with us. Let me also quickly bring in my other guests for this show. I have Mirza Faizan, aerospace scientist and aviation safety expert. Sanjay Lazar, CEO at Avialas Consultants. Thank you so much for joining us. And just before we begin, any further questions, I'd just like to make a request to all of the panelists and even for us here at the studio to try and keep the language as simple and jargon-free as possible. We understand it is a matter that is sensitive, it's fragile, so the simplest of languages so that our audiences can really understand the details of the report. So that would be really appreciated. Mirza Faizan, do you see this as a design flaw or as a systems failure, given the details that you're seeing in the prelim report so far?
At this point of time, the report is far from pointing towards a design flaw because they have not gone into the technicalities of why this happened. One of the things which they pointed out is that within 1 second, both the fuel cutoff switch were change the state to the off position. Now, the aircraft system is designed with a fail-safe philosophy. And what's a fail-safe philosophy? The fail-safe philosophy tells us that if we have to design a system in such a way that the system fails, the aircraft is still safe. So 2 switches, each for each engine, they change state within 1 second, is not a design flaw because both switches have their own lock. Now, let us assume for a second that the lock of one switch had a mechanical wear and tear. Because of this, it failed. What about both? And both failing at the same time, I mean, we have to have intense and deep investigation for us to say whether that was a design flaw or not. So I think we are not really close to that answer as of now.
Okay, all right. So, Sanjay Lazar, then does this, would you say, expose a deeper problem with how safety advisories are being treated by Indian operators? Because let's remember, the FAA actually issued an advisory in 2018 about this very risk on similar switches, but we saw Air India not acting it, calling it non-mandatory at that time.
Yeah, the FAA's 2018 directive was in fact non-mandatory and for all operators across the world for it emanated from a 737 problem, but it covered aircrafts like 747, 757, 767, the 787, and we don't really know how other operators around the world treated it. But coming to this, you spoke of design flaw. Prior to this, with my previous guest, the report itself has raised more questions than it answers, in my view. I find it very strange that 3 days ago, US-based sources, media sources had all these details, and we were not reporting this in India, nor was the government telling us. Also regrettable that the entire CVR transcript was not released by AAIB to help us all understand more. And, like Captain Panesar said, it should have been, would have been more comfortable had it been a judicial inquiry also, rather than just a bureaucratic inquiry apart from the AAIB, because these details would come out. The other thing is, they just mentioned one line. One pilot asks the other, why did you cut off? He says, no, I didn't. And we know that the FAA directive of 2018 says there could be inadvertent deployment. Now, we don't know whether this piece, now it's not one, remember, it's not one lock, it's a combined piece of two. So when something is wrong with one, you replace both. Now, whether that product was actually a defective one or not, or whether it belonged to the 2018 mandated specification, we don't know. We do know that the throttle levers were changed in 2023. And there was trouble-free aircraft. And we now understand purely that something caused both engines to fail, lack of fuel, as we now know. How and why, we don't know. So I find it very strange that the last line, the report is also, not given a clean sheet, but it says there are no recommendations for Boeing or GE, which would imply that either the AAIB knows more than it's willing to disclose at this point, or, without having concluded a thorough investigation, we are now saying it's okay, let the 2018 circular go, be by the wayside, and Boeing and GE can continue doing what they want. So that has troubled me a lot. It's indicative of a reason to want to point to human error or pilot error or whatever.
But I think, Sanjay Lazar, I'm actually going to scratch the surface a little bit more with regards to that advisory. I know that you're saying that, it covered all other kinds of aircraft, and, Air India didn't find it mandatory, and that's why they didn't go ahead with it. But what I'm asking is that henceforth, do you think that whether the advisory is mandatory at all, if it does raise this kind of flag, airlines and aircraft operators must take it seriously?
Absolutely. In fact, that last line in the AAIB report, that's exactly my point. By putting that last line, the AAIB has literally given a get out of jail card for, Boeing and GE. If there is something wrong with that Honeywell part, which they speak of in the circular, in FAA circular, then obviously it requires looking at. We don't know the background of what it is. So I do believe that, of course, I'm sure Air India will look into it deeply. The DGCA and the AAIB will. But what about the other 1,150 787s flying around the world, which may have that part? Let's understand, not all 787s have that part. There is a newer model that is now installed in most of them. So let's look at that as well. I do believe there will be, a lot of soul searching here. So I find that line very objectionable, in my personal opinion.
If for our viewers and for us here at the studio as well, if you could explain to us simply how the fuel switch and the cutoff actually works? And when does it actually go into a run? When does it go into cutoff? What is the lock system? If you could simplify it and break it down for us, please.
Well, essentially, the fuel control switch, which is the subject of great discussion, since last night, I actually since a couple of days, is one that just controls flow of fuel to the engines. So you use it generally on ground or in an emergency in the air, and it shuts off or it supplies fuel to both engines in the 787. Now here, what they're trying to show is that they were inadvertently or deliberately shut off at a particular point in time. So that's how it the moment there is no fuel going to an engine, it's obviously going to stall. We understand that. So that's the essential, rationale behind the fuel flow valve, the switch.
Okay. I also have Captain C.S. Randhawa, President, Federation of Indian Pilot, who also served as former Deputy Chief Flight Operations Inspector at the DGCA, joining me on the phone line with more. Good morning, sir, and welcome to NDTV Profit. Thank you so much.
Go to gate 2.
Thank you so much for speaking with us, sir. If you can hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yes, sir. Sir, regarding this prelim report, trying to understand from you, can a pilot accidentally move the fuel switches that are feeding the engines?
No, the pilot cannot feed in the cannot fiddle with the fuel control switches. If you see, now on the aircraft on the throttle quadrant, and on the side there are guards. So by accidentally, the pilot's sleeves and all cannot touch that switch. Secondly, these switches are spring-loaded. Like if I have to run it, I have to pull it out and then move it to run. Similarly, from run to cut off, I have to take it up, it's spring-loaded, and put it down. Now, this action is deliberate. When you start the engines, you put the fuel switches to run, and only in case of an emergency like fire or do engine flame out, you recycle these switches so that the EEC, which is the electronic engine control, that can be reset and the relight procedure can start, and which will trigger even for the APU to start in case of a two-engine flame out. Now, in the report, if you see, they have not adequately covered that when the aircraft has got airborne, okay, within 4 seconds, these switches have been recycled. Now, moment the aircraft lifts up, there is a micro switch in the landing gear, main landing gear. When it is decompressed because it lifts off, the aircraft goes from ground mode to air mode, and there is a transfer of electric power. So maybe the power interruption has cut both the engines. Possibility that can be verified only from the DFDR. Now that has not been amply brought out in the report. That what has happened in this 4 seconds. They have said that the throttle levers have been found at idle position. The fuel control switches have been to run position, but they have been recycled. But what was the condition of the engines in these 4 seconds? That is not clarified. And no external agency can actually recycle those until unless there is some interruption in the power, and without the fuel control switches physically, cut off and to run. I have never seen it and never heard of such a thing that it can happen automatically with a power interruption also. Where the possibility is if the engines have flamed out, and if the fuel control switches have been recycled, that is condition number 1. And the second thing is you must understand the RAT is deployed. So that is quite obvious that the engines had flamed out after liftoff.
Okay. All right. So you're essentially saying that the power interruption could have led to the inadvertent movement of the switches, sir?
No. They will, you see, the EEC basically sends the power supply to a FedEx which controls the fuel supply to the engine. Now, if there is a power interruption, it could have triggered off, shutting the fuel supply through the FEDEC into the engine. So that possibility is there. So what I'm saying is, in the prelim report, this is not very clear that what has happened in those 4 seconds after liftoff till the time they found the fuel switches, control switches, which are shut off and again put to run. What has happened in these 4 seconds?
Okay, understood. So, Captain Randhawa, while I have you, let me also come to the advisory that everybody is talking about, the FAA advisory back from 2018 that clearly raised this issue. Should advisories automatically be enforced when safety critical components are involved?
See, whenever any of such bulletins are issued, if they are advisory in nature, it is up to the airline to carry out any action or not. If it is mandatory, then they have to carry out whatever is required by the manufacturer. Now, in this case, it was advisory in nature. Now, since advisory in nature, if Air India has not carried out the requisite checks, then they may not have found it appropriate. But nevertheless, if this advisory was there, they could have done a percentage check at least on some aircraft.
All right.
But it is not mandatory.
It is not mandatory. Okay, sir. And
no.
At the cost of, I know that I'm pressing further, but can these switches transition from cut off or vice versa within 1 second?
See, you have to do it physically. You see, pilots are taught, in a dual engine fail out, okay, these are memory actions, all right? This is basically to reset the EEC, the engine, electronic engine control. If you see that in the report, they're saying that the number 1 engine started picking and the number 2 engine yet to pick up. So I'm of the view that maybe that both engines got cut off when aircraft was lifted off. It has taken some time for the engines to spool down, and aircraft has, in the meantime, if you see, it has accelerated to from 155 knots to 180 knots. That is the maximum speed this aircraft has achieved after takeoff.
All right. Captain C.S. Randhawa, thank you so much for speaking with us. If you could, do stay on with us, but I'm also going to quickly go back to our other guests that are joining us. India has one of the fastest growing fleets, Captain Pane sir. Other aircraft in Air India fleet may have similar switches. So what immediate checks should regulators mandate now across airlines?
Ma'am, these switches are fail-safe features. They just can't move with a simple movement of a hand and all. They are, as said by other person, Captain Randhawa, they have to lift it and then move it. There are certain switches which have fail-safe features. You just can't, like gear lever, you can put it up. Flap lever, you cannot put it up. It is in a notch. You have to lift it up, then move it. It needs little force and all. Now, talking all these things, they're showing picture. Why not to go by DFDR? Why the Boeing company, NTSB people, or AAIB people who are coming, why they are not giving comments about these switches? Why only AAIB is talking about it? Let us take their comments also and correlate with the DFDR readout. Okay, what is the position of lever, what time it was lifted up, what time it was put it up. Everything will be in the readout. But they are not going to make public all these things. This is a closed door meeting. We can only contemplate and think and imagine this is possible, this could have been done. But all these switches, they are fail-safe features. You just can't move them up and down. There are certain switches, you can just move it up. There are no pressure on that. But especially the fuel lever and flap lever, they have a fail-safe features. You just can't move them straight away up and down. This has to be correlated with the day. And why not the NTSB or the advisors and the cow experts who are also watching, why don't they also give comments about these things? Let us take their comments also. Had it been judicial inquiry, we would ask them questions. But we cannot ask questions to anybody. It's only a closed, whatever report they give it, the only high-level committee of secretary level will tell us whether it is right or wrong. We have to wait for the final report when they give it. It is no use to contemplate and imagine things at this stage. Because they're not showing us the flight record, they are not telling us the CVR record. They're just saying this has been found, and we don't know. We are not sure. Because they are not making all these readouts public. Unless you make it public, how would we like to comment about it?
Okay, that's fair, sir. That's fair, sir. Mirza Faizan, do you expect Boeing to issue any kind of updated guidance or recalls based on these findings? Completely cognizant of what all of you are saying, everybody seems to be saying the same thing, that potentially a judicial probe or a deeper probe will be needed. This is only a preliminary report, and that these switches are in fact fail-safe. But given this, do you think that there will be updated guidance?
So first of all, Selena, I agree with Captain Panesar when he's saying that things have to be public. I mean, let's take a step back. It reminds me of a very interesting air crash of Helios Flight 522, where the plane took off, and within a couple of minutes, the master alarm started, and everyone in the aircraft, they just slept because of lack of oxygen. And the plane flew on autopilot for 3 hours, even though it was no fuel left in the aircraft crashed after 3 hours. And it was found that there was just one switch, which is auto cabin pressurization switch, which was switched to manual from auto, and they never sent it back to auto. There was one switch. The entire investigation was based on that. Now, this investigation, I think NTSB, National Transportation Safety Board of the United States here, they must be made a partner of this. I am not pointing questions at the capability of AAIB, but there's something which is called experience. Experience matters. You know, NTSB has investigated hundreds of air crash, right? So they should be definitely be a part of this simply because of their capability and the experience, right? Coming back to your question about Boeing, as I said, it is too early for Boeing to issue any directive, right? FAA has issued the directive that SAIB has been issued 2018. It was not mandatory. It was not impacting the airworthiness of the aircraft. Nevertheless, it was an advisory. And advisory was like, okay, it's not, you don't have to ground your fleet. It is not urgent. Do at your convenience. But after 7 years, we did not have that convenience to just check that. We should have done that. So in aviation industry, the safety is actually a mindset. And with this incident, I see that mindset was somehow missing. And keep this in mind, no air crash. I'll just make one last point, Sanjana. No air crash happens with one isolated incident.
Right.
There are chains. And the chains, everything is part of the chain. The Air India is a part of the chain. Boeing is a part of the chain. FAA is a part of the chain. The pilots are the part of the chain. Everything is a part of the chain. Who presses the button is the guy. We can blame them, but actually the whole chain reaction. So for Boeing, they will have to wait and watch for the detailed investigation, public investigation, and that's when they should be able to, they'll be able to make some comments.
Okay, I believe we still have CS Randhawa, sir, on the phone. I'm going to come to you, sir. You know, as the report also mentions Air India pilot simulations showing that landing gear and flap configurations did not cause the crash. From a pilot's perspective, how valuable are these simulations in ruling out certain factors, and what other scenarios do you think need to be tested to understand the loss of thrust?
You see, first and foremost thing, there are three things which have been established very clearly: that the landing gear lever has been in down position, the flaps have been found in 5 position, which is the takeoff position, and the third part is aircraft was not up, heavily loaded. It was still about more than 5 tons below the max takeoff weight. So these three things have established. Now, the how the sequence goes, that if you see at V1 and after 2 seconds it was VR, which is 153 to 155, and the aircraft lifts off. Now, when the aircraft lifts off, when it goes up to a certain height, then the pilot monitoring, he says positive rate, that means the aircraft is definitely in the air. And the pilot flying says gear up, and the gear is taken up. Now, in this case, the gear has not been taken up, and the lever is in down position, and the landing gear has been down. The flaps have not been retracted. On the contrary, within 4-5 seconds, the fuel switches have been recycled. So that makes you speculate that the engines flamed out when there was a transfer from ground mode to air mode or slightly later. Otherwise, why should the fuel control switches be recycled? And I do not know that DFDR can only say that if there was an interruption in the fuel supply and what has happened. So that is not very clear from the report.
Sure, sir. Sir, given your role with the Federation of Indian Pilots, how would you assess the adequacy of Air India's training for the pilots in handling unexpected engine shutdowns, especially in light of the cockpit voice recording where one pilot questioned the other about cutting off the fuel?
The pilots training in Air India is very good. The pilots are trained adequately on the dual engine flameouts, and we used to make the pilots practice, and they have to come up to the standards. And these are memory items which the pilot has to do. And in this case, apparently the takeoff was being conducted by the first officer, and the pilot monitoring was the captain. Now, it is again not very clear that who has given the command, that who has switched on and off the fuel levers, and who has given the mayday call. Right? Now, the Boeing clearly stipulates that there is pilot flying and pilot monitoring. So there's a division of duties. So the pilot flying, in this case, was the first officer. But in case of exigencies, when problems occur, the pilot in command normally takes over the controls. But this was a too short a time, and just after takeoff, and I don't know whether the controls were still with the first officer or with the captain. Again, this is not clear in the preliminary report. It has just said that the first officer was carrying out the takeoff.
Sir, so then to put it simply, do you believe this points to a possible pilot error, or could it indicate a design flaw in the 787's fuel switch mechanism?
Yes, I believe that this cannot be a pilot error, but there has to be something gone wrong with the engines for the pilot to have moved the fuel switches to off and on. So it can only be deciphered when they do intensive investigation over a period of time, and it will come clearly that what has actually happened. And because it's not clear from the report as to whether the engines were running or not in those first 4 or 5 seconds after the aircraft has got airborne.
Okay, so then do you believe that interim measures should be implemented, such as enhanced checks on fuel control systems, while the investigation still continues, sir?
Investigation will continue because a detailed investigation goes over months. They try to reconstruct the crashed aircraft, and they try to find out the components and what is their condition, and the DFDR has to be properly read, and all sorts of things have to be done. But this thing, I don't know why this has not come out. That were the engines running or not after it got airborne?
Okay. So would there potentially, sir, be also, a possibility of whether the pilots did this on purpose?
No. I had totally ruled it out.
Okay.
No pilot will cut off the engines, cut off the fuel switches and put it. No. Not at all.
Right, sir. All right. Captain C.S. Randhawa, thank you so much. But stay with us. Let me quickly go back to Captain Surjit, who'd like to come in. Yes, sir. Over to you. You'd like to say something.
Yeah, I would like to say something. In the last crash at Bangalore, a 320 crash, we took the DFDR in Toulouse in a simulator. And once you put the DFDR in simulator, the simulator flew exactly like an aircraft flew up to the point of crash. I do not know whether the system is available now or not. Why can't they play the DFDR into the simulator and the simulator fly like an aircraft? Everything will be clear after that. And then you can compare it with the DFDR and cockpit voice recorder also. But I'm not sure whether they can do it or not in India, or they have to go to the company where they have facility where they can put the DFDR in the simulator, and the simulator will fly exactly like this aircraft. Everything will be flown, and all the signals, everything will come out automatically.
Okay.
It is only see whether they have the system or not, and whether they thought of it. Because 320, I had the picture. I've seen myself personally the aircraft flying exactly before the crash, how it crashed in Bangalore.
All
We
right.
have to see the system.
Okay. I'm going to quickly go back to Captain Randhawa, and then I'm going to go to my colleague Sajid, who's standing by with regards to the Tata Sons Group and their reactions coming in. Captain Randhawa, drawing from your DGCA experience, how effectively have Indian operators implemented advisories like the one that we saw at FAA back in 2018? And do you think that this issue could have been overlooked for the 787 fleet? Captain Randhawa, if you can hear me. Right, we seem to have lost the line and the connection there with Captain Randhawa. We'll try and get him back in just a moment. But meanwhile, let me quickly go across to my colleague Sajid, who's standing by. We tried contacting the Tata Sons Group on this investigation report. Sources have told NDTV Profit that Air India only has a preliminary report. This is something that Sajid, our panelists, have also been echoing, and that Air India was not part of the investigations undertaken. Give us all of the details, though.
That's right, Sanjana. As you know, this entire investigation is being spearheaded by AAIB, which is the Indian version of the Aircraft Security Agency, which looks into any kind of accidents. And it's also been an NTSB, which is the US arm, is also part of it. But none of the airlines, either the OEM or the operator, is part of this investigation. So this report, which came out late last night or early morning after 1 a.m., that's a 15-page report which Air India has, and Air India has confirmed that they have received this report from AAIB. At this point in time, they don't have anything to say on this, because beyond what has been given in the initial report, and primarily because there is not enough details for them to comment on it. Of course, there are a couple of things that some of the sources are talking about. Is basically everything is boiling down to a two-line comment on how the pilots have reacted to the fuel switch off. But again, the entire flight was of 32 seconds, and there is no details of what happened in that 32 seconds. And as some of our panelists also spoke, it's not easy to switch off fuel. It requires a physical effort to do so. So it's again boils down to how the engineering investigation comes up into it. So this report, which has come exactly in a month after the crash, will again, there will be a lot of more investigation coming into each and every aspect of it, whether it's a flight data recorder or black box details of or every part, which includes switch over from ground to air, which many of our panelists are talking about. Those things, those details will have to come out before Air India or Boeing can comment on it. Both of them are bound by Section 13, which prevents them from commenting on any report or on investigation. So this entire investigation, we are told, will take at least 9 to 12 months before a final report is brought out. This is just a preliminary report based on the initial evidences which have come in and initial recordings which have come in. But it requires a detailed investigation with respect to engineering, because the question still remains: how did the fuel switch off happen, and what happened in those 4 or 5 seconds? We just have one audio of the two pilots talking about it, but beyond that, there's nothing to tell us what was conspiring in the cockpit or within the aircraft. because it took off at 180 knots, which is a normal speed to take off an aircraft, and then suddenly you have flame out happening for both the engines together, and there's an attempt to recycle, switch fuel so that the engines can restart. One starts, but it doesn't get enough thrust. The second one starts, but the thrust doesn't come in. So I think it's something which is more needed from the investigation point of view, and that's what our sources are saying, that it's very it's not fair for them to comment on this point at this point in time. Tata Sons, which owns Air India, has decided not to comment on it because it's entirely an Air India domain at this point in time. So they will go by what Air India has to say, and Air India is bound by the conventions, which is Article Annexes 13, which prevents them from commenting on it. And so does so does Boeing is also there. So there are a couple of things which are in play as well. There's also one reference to the advisory which came in 2018. That was with respect to 737s. What crashed was a 787 Dreamliner. The advisory was non-mandatory in nature. So again, it's basically expanding the scope from GE to Boeing to Honeywell, and there are multiple more vendors who would be part of making of an aircraft. So that entire discussion or detailed investigation has to come in before the airline or the OEM responds to it.
Absolutely, Sajid. Thank you for that very comprehensive information coming in from sources. We also spoke with my colleague Rishabh, where Boeing had issued a statement in response to NDTV Profit's query, reaffirming its support for both the investigation and the airline. The aircraft manufacturer says it will defer to aviation authorities for further updates in line with global protocols. My colleague Rishabh brings us more details on this. Rishabh, over to you.
The preliminary report of the AI-171 crash in Ahmedabad that led to the losses of lives of over 240 people has come out. And in response to that, Boeing, the maker of that very aircraft, has come out with a statement to NDTV Profit. What Boeing has said that its thoughts remains with the loved ones and those who lost their lives in that crash. And also that it continues to support the investigation and its customer, which is Air India in this case. Boeing has also said that it will defer to the AAIB, which is the investigating authority in this matter, to provide more information about AI-171, as well as which is in adherence with the United Nations International Civil Aviation Organization protocol. Now, clearly not much coming in there from the manufacturer of this plane, given that now we know that the reason for this crash was the cut off of the fuel supply to the twin engines of the aircraft. So that is what has come in. Air India too has said that it will defer all inquiries and queries to the AAIB, given that this is just a preliminary report. It's not the final status report of what actually went wrong with the plane, but we have a preliminary reason now, and this is what Boeing's response has been so far.
Right, Rishabh, thank you so much for bringing us that update with regards to the Boeing statement. Let me quickly go across to a reaction that came in earlier from Rajiv Pratap Rudy, four-time MP from BJP, and of course the former aviation minister. Let's quickly go there.
कप्तान को जब लगता है कि मेरा इंजन फ्लेम आउट हुआ, वो दोनों स्विच को ऑफ करता है और वापस फिर ऑन करता है, तो उसी समय जो उसका कंप्यूटर है वो इस कमांड को लेता है और फिर से इंजन स्टार्ट करने लगता है। रिपोर्ट में यह भी दिया गया है कि एक इंजन वापस स्टार्ट होने लगा है और दूसरा इंजन स्टार्ट होते होते उसे कुछ वक्त लग रहा था। तो ये स्पष्ट है कि फिर से इंजन फ्लेम आउट के बाद फिर से इंजन स्टार्ट होने लगा है और कप्तान ने उस प्रयास को स्विच ऑफ करके ऑन तुरंत किया, जो विद इन फ्रैक्शन ऑफ अ सेकंड उसने किया है, और ये इंजन स्टार्ट हुआ। लेकिन तब तक इंजन का पावर इतना कम हो गया था और सामने में, क्योंकि ये तो बड़ा सवाल है आने वाले दिनों में कि एयरपोर्ट के सामने भवनों के निर्माण पर जो ये चर्चा है उसको हम अलग से लेंगे, और उसके बाद उसने नियंत्रण खो दिया है। मेडे मेडे मेडे, यानी कि मैं अब अंतिम मेरी अंतिम प्रयास है, मैं मौत से जूझ रहा हूं, और अंतिम संवाद करके वो विमान क्रैश कर गया है।
And let me quickly go back to my guests that are joining me. Mirza Faizan, the report references the 2018 FAA bulletin about the fuel control switch disengagement risks on Boeing aircraft. You're an aviation safety expert. How would you assess whether this issue, and we have been saying originally noted for 737s, could apply to the 787's design? And what modifications do you think that we need to prevent recurrence?
Sanjana, so when a new platform is designed, when I say platform, I mean new aircraft is designed, most of the systems are reused from the previous design, and we add additional systems, which is the new design based on this system. For example, if the fuel control switch from 737 is working fine, Boeing will not take that switch and redesign it for 787, right? So if there's an advisory from FAA, which is for 737, and I think this advisory was targeted towards 787 as well, if I remember it correctly. They said it is not impacting the airworthiness of the aircraft. You do not have to ground your aircraft, but it is an advisory. Do it at your discretion, at your convenience. Airline should have taken it. It's been 7 years for that advice, so they should have definitely taken this up. I do not think that Boeing is going to let's redesign this whole fuel control switch altogether, like they did with the MCAS system for 737, which down 2 aircrafts back to back. I don't think that will be a reason, and this is a sufficiently safe switch. As we said, as other experts have said, this is a spring-loaded, so you cannot just do that. They have 2 bridges, which is pilot cannot by mistake also turn it on and off. So sufficiently safe switch. I think redesign is not needed. A timely check from time to time, I think will do the job.
Okay, all right. I'm going to quickly come to Captain Pane sir, and I know that we've taken a fair bit of your time, so thank you so much for joining us this morning. This is a question that I also posed to Captain Randhawa sir. Given that the prelim report has revealed what it has, do you think that there are any interim measures that we can put in place while there are deeper and more longer and detailed investigations that are still ongoing? Let's remember, this is only the prelim report that we have at the moment.
We have to wait for the final outcome of the report. This report is nothing. It does not recommend anything. It's not a complete report about the whole system. Only the detailed study of DFDR, CBR, and other factors are allowed by involving professionals and veterans, not in a closed-door meeting. Let there be I'm putting a step, let there be judicial inquiry, a public inquiry. Let the professionals whom you are asking question now, let them ask to the people who are investigating these questions. Now we have to wait for another report which will come, may take 6 months or 1 year. By the time people will forget about everything. This report has to come immediately. It's a big concern for the whole world, and especially for the Boeing industry. They have to suggest how to stop such a recurrence. You see, the main theme of all investigation is to do it honestly, correctly, so that these things do not happen in future. We have to suggest measures to improve the system. We are not here to criticize anybody. But that attitude has to be there. Then in that attitude, if you investigate, I'm sure you will come to a conclusion how to recommend or suggest improvements in the aviation. In a Calicut crash, they give a recommendation report of 600 pages. Who's going to read a useless report? Because that was done by unprofessional people. They have written like thesis on that report. You have to involve professionals and show them everything, honestly investigate it, so that such things do not happen in future. And we want to raise the confidence of the traveling public and not to scare them by our imagination and by these type of reports.
Okay. Captain Surjit Pane sir and Mirza Faizan, thank you so much for joining us and giving us your time, and more importantly, all of this insight and really simplifying this report. After weeks of speculation, the report into India's worst aviation disaster in years is finally out. But as my panelists have been saying this morning, it is a preliminary report. So we have to wait till the investigations are complete. Let's remember, on June 12th, Air India flight A171, a Boeing 787 bound for London, crashed just seconds after takeoff from Ahmedabad, killing 241 people on board and 19 on ground. Today, for the first time, investigators have confirmed a couple of things. Both fuel cutoff switches moved to cut off mid-air, cutting power to the engines. Cockpit audio revealed stunned pilots asking, "Why did you cut off?" And the other one saying, "I didn't." So this report has raised some grave questions that we've attempted to answer today, whether this was a mechanical failure, a human error, why was an FAA safety advisory ignored by Air India for years, and crucially, are other aircraft at risk now? We'll continue asking those questions and bring you all of the answers. But for now, thank you for watching.
Your own journey has also been so